Yes, Your Honor. Officers responded yesterday, early morning hours, to Julia Drive, which is off of Carolina Beach Road. They had received a phone call about an incident that occurred involving this defendant and some other people. They got to Julia Drive, went down to the end of a cul-de-sac where they found the victim, Terry Greenwood, dead on the ground beside his truck. There was another victim inside of the truck named Tony Lanza. At autopsy this morning, it was discovered that Mr. Greenwood had been stabbed 8 times and had been shot in the face. Mr. Lanza is currently still in the hospital receiving treatment for his serious stab wounds that he had to his chest. Officers began to investigate the incident, learned through their investigation that this defendant and Mr. Greenwood had a history of altercations, right now believed to have centered around this defendant's wife. There was some sort of relationship that she may have had with Mr. Greenwood at some point. Earlier in the evening, it's known that this defendant had approached Mr. Greenwood at another location. There had been some sort of argument or altercation, and in the late night hours, that altercation ended up back on Julia Drive. Officers were able to put this defendant at the scene of that cul-de-sac based on video and audio evidence they collected from the street. In that video, you can see the victim's truck driving down to the cul-de-sac, followed shortly by this defendant's white Mercedes-Benz. You can also hear a gunshot early. You cannot see what happened, but you can hear a gunshot early in the altercation. An altercation goes on for at least 2 more minutes, where you can hear some screams and grunts during the course of that altercation. And then you see the white Mercedes turn around, drive back in the opposite direction, which happens to be back towards his house with his lights off. Officers found this defendant's car parked out front of his house. There was a large amount of blood inside his vehicle. Pursuant to a search warrant they later found, they also found blood inside of his house and other evidence linking him to possibly having been involved in this killing down on the cul-de-sac. The defendant himself was taken to the hospital based on the phone call law enforcement had received from his friend. It's unknown exactly what his diagnosis was at the hospital. We know that he didn't have any serious lacerations, no gunshot wounds. It is thought that at most he may have had a concussion at this stage. He was able to check himself out of the hospital. After leaving the hospital, he ran several errands, including going back to attempting to go to a friend's house and also to a known gang hangout. He is a validated Hell's Angel gang member, validated out of Fayetteville. He also disposed of some items in a dumpster behind the local restaurant. Officers did speak with him. Several items were found in the cul-de-sac that showed the kind of the chaos of this altercation. There were several weapons, including a handgun, some knives, and another gun clip that were found there, as well as a slapstick that were all left there at the scene. When they attempted to speak with the defendant, he eventually came down to law enforcement to describe or talk to them about what happened. He initially said that there had been some sort of physical altercation out in front of his house. He didn't know who it was, that somebody with a mask had approached him. He then basically denied having any knowledge of anything that happened down at the cul-de-sac at the end of the street, and said he didn't remember anything about any of those items that were found there belonging to him, didn't have any idea of what happened at the end of Julia Drive. There was some evidence found in his house that were believed will be related to this crime. There's other investigation ongoing right now. It was a fairly complicated crime scene. He was a convicted felon at the time with a drug conviction out of Texas. He also has convictions out of Texas for, I believe, resisting officers and theft. Your Honor, we're asking at this time that the court set a bond in the amount of $2 million, and we're asking that if this defendant is able to post that bond, that he be brought back in front of a judge to have some pretrial release conditions placed on him. We believe that he is a danger, and again, this is an unfolding investigation that we believe it was solved fairly quickly, but I'm not convinced that this is the last of the charges that might come against him.